Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Grenier.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential. Hi, guys, and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast, where life is story. I want to start out by saying Virginia and I are always kind of trying to up our game and improve our format and our protocol. And we're going to go back to kind of chatting a little bit before we invite today's guest in from the green room. So don't be alarmed that we're changing things up a little bit. But welcome, Virginia.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And some of you may remember we often gave Virginia a title. So I don't know. We've been chatting a little bit, right? We've been kind of touching base and sharing what's going on in our lives, but it has been a while since we've done a podcast. So simply put, what are your nails looking like right now?
And it's funny, I just got them done. So the fact that we're bringing up my nails again is quite funny because I know we haven't talked about them in a while.
Well, I decided this is the reason I'm asking.
Yeah.
They've become your alter ego.
They are. So
they absolutely reflect what's going on in your life at the moment.
Yeah. So they do have mushrooms on them, but they're not just straight mushrooms because we came out of Valentine's Day because I had actually gnomes with love on them for Valentine's Day. But so now I have mushrooms, but they actually, for the first time, are reflecting my spirituality. So they actually have the sun and moon and the goddess on my nails as well with the mushrooms.
Wow.
In gold.
Yeah, I think last time you had shroom nails, they were, what do you call it, like fluorescent? They glowed in the dark.
Yeah, so this time it's green and gold and red. The mushrooms are all red, but the green and gold is for the sun, the moon, and the goddess are all in gold. And then I have green kind of scrolliness on them too. So I'll take a picture and get them out there on social media.
Absolutely. Well, so you are aware that, I mean, we kind of joked one week that like, when you wear red, you go out into the world with confidence, right? And so sometimes it's unexamined. You are aware it reflects where you're at this week in your little journey, your little tiny spiritual journey.
Yeah. And I'm also getting together with fellow counselors this coming week. So that's kind of why I picked this. So it was just a very open reflection of me and my wholeness.
I love it. Yeah, you're in a good place. Transition is always good. And I know even without getting, too much dirty laundry out on the table here, you've been in transition. So do you feel like you're emerging from kind of a little dark night of the soul, or is that too much?
No, that's actually probably a really good way to put it. For the first time in a long time, I feel grounded again. But this time where I feel like all of my walls are down, and I am 100% authentically showing myself to the world, which has been something I haven't done since my youth.
Wow. Actually, I feel like that is a strong statement to make. I love it. You're in a great place. And I think that's going to come up majorly because, going back to our core essence is a theme on this show. And I don't think it's going to be any different with today's guest, Mark. Correct. But I can't help but say, shrooms are kind of the archetype for interconnectivity, right? The largest organism that we know of is that network of shrooms.
Yes.
All interconnected. Was it in Oregon or Washington?
I don't remember, actually.
Yeah, so you mentioned groundedness. That seems apropos. But also interconnectivity. And that's what we're all about. Okay, so I guess that's related to my introduction here. Speaking of interconnectivity, we all know the interwebs have made the world a smaller place, right? But they've also isolated us in a lot of ways and robbed us of what we used to call social skills. So online, I think Mark would say the same thing. I don't often friend strangers, really. But I had somebody reach out and friend me on Facebook. And we do have 5 or 6 mutual friends, but that's not unusual in the gay community, right? We all know each other, right? Especially in LA. We've got it less so now. As I get older, I'm like, yeah, if I go down to WeHo and I go to a club, it's going to be the kids straight off the bus from Iowa, not the old staples that I know. So I'm less and less involved in the community and more isolated here in my ghetto, which is Silver Lake. So I don't want to go on, but I did notice, and maybe we can get to the bottom of the, what is it, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? Like how Mark knows some of our mutual friends. But in any case, I'm so glad he did reach out because, yes, I immediately checked out his book. And I thought it might have been podcast related, I guess. That was in the back of my mind. I thought, hey, maybe he wants to come on the show or he's heard about it. So turns out his book is amazing. He is the ideal guest, and I'm sure he won't disappoint in terms of our agenda. And there really isn't one, right? Other than illustrating. We never want to use guests as guinea pigs. We want them to present themselves as they wish. But often, certain themes come up that are really relevant to our podcast. Am I Anything you want to add to that, Virginia? I feel
No,
like
I absolutely agree. I think that you know, when we get going with our guests, that we always find, and I'm going to steal this from a counseling friend of mine, but she calls it the golden thread. So it's that interconnected link between everybody when like you're in a counseling group. And so I think that we have that same experience here on Language of the Soul.
Do you always find it in a group counseling situation? Do you always get to the bottom of what that thread is?
Generally it's usually a general kind of overarching theme, but where everybody's at a different place in their life, but it's still connected to that main central theme. And I think that's kind of what happens here when we have our guests come on, that, when we talk to them, we're like, okay, yeah, they're going to be a great guest. They're right there. But when we start going, it's those branches start just kind of to develop. And then we can see that whole interconnectivity, not just between what we're sharing with the guests and they're sharing back with us, but even with past episodes.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I do think we've built a community and we do have a lot of kindred spirits. And I think there are good reasons we find that common thread eventually, It's because of the intent of the podcast. It always goes back to intent. But I also think, just on the topic of story, it's kind of fascinating how, yes, within one conversation, an arc kind of magically molds itself and themes and motifs reoccur from beginning to end. I learned that in my, I think at 19 or 20 at Art Center. I think I've told you I went out and interviewed street people, which turned out to be teenage runaways, squatters, the shoe shine man, a male prostitute, like you name it. But I recorded, because back then you just recorded analog, recorded the interviews and then transcribed them. And I painted their portraits. It was part of a journalistic project. But at 1920, I learned that, like, holy crap, within one interview, all the milestones and the turning points just presented themselves. And it was like begging to be written as a screenplay. And anyway, so that's the power of story. We open our mouths and these things, the archetypes and the tropes magically occur, as well as the themes and the motifs.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I would love to hear more maybe later about the group counseling and how that's going. And the narrative therapy aspect is always relevant to the podcast.
Yes.
Okay, I feel like some of that's going to come up. So I'm going to read Mark's bio. So what I didn't say is, yes, when I checked out Mark and frankly stalked him on the interwebs, I did fall in love with his book and everything I learned about him. I do feel like we're the same person in so many ways, with maybe David Sedaris as our third brother from another mother. Anyway, and I did read his entire memoir. It's called Ink from the Pen. And unfortunately, when I do that, like with Robbie Zabrecki, a kid I grew up with, and in this case, it does help. I have said in the past that Adele is my spirit animal because she canceled an interview once because they didn't take the time to even listen to the album. So I've done many podcasts, and I do feel like there's more grist for the mill if they've read my material. However, now that I'm a host, I get overwhelmed. So that I have a learning curve of my own. I find that if I read it immediately before the podcast so that it's fresh, then I don't know which thread to pick at, if that makes sense. So just bear with me. I think objectivity is maybe better. So, Virginia, I'm counting on you. I say that every week for one reason or another, but I can't really see the forest for the trees because I'm so immersed in the wonderful. I call it a memoir because it's not a whole. You can tell me, Mark, when you enter the room, whether it's a memoir or an autobiography. Anyway, I adored it, and maybe at some point I'll read my little review. I don't. That's the other downside is it becomes about me and my reaction to the work too much. It's really irrelevant. Number one, I'm not qualified to review people, but it's also kind of irrelevant. So I may or may not read or share some of my reactions to his amazing book. Okay, without further ado, okay, got to get some lighting on my little paper here. Mark Olmsted has been a writer since graduating from NYU School of the Arts in 1980. After over a decade in Manhattan, he moved to California to pursue screenwriting and take care of his brother, who died of AIDS in 1991. Gay and HIV positive himself, Mark self-medicated through the worst of the plague years with crystal meth, which led to a conviction for drug dealing in 2004 and 9 months in prison. Ink from the Pen is the story of his time behind bars. Mark emerged into a life of recovery and activism, getting a master's degree in the humanities at Mount St. Mary's University and penning hundreds of essays on the Huffington Post, Medium, and Substack. He is working on an expanded memoir as well as a novel, and is presently the subject of 3 episodes of the podcast, Everything is Stories. Sounds familiar? He lives in Los Angeles, California. Okay, welcome, Mark Olmsted.
Hello, Dominic and Virginia. So glad to be here. And I should tell you right off the bat that right before this, I signed on. I signed on to the Zoom. I posted your review.
I saw that.
Yeah,
I saw that.
Because it was just, and what do you mean you're not qualified? There's no degree in criticism. You're at least as qualified as you are to host a podcast. So and it tickled me. I'm glad I forgot to look at it until right before, because it sort of buoyed me, and it's a kind of dream review that I will brandish.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So thank you very much.
I'm glad you did say immediately after, because I really wrote an informal one just to you and gave you my reaction. And then when you asked me to put it on Audible, I did spruce it up a little bit, and I tried to put on my academic hat a little bit. But I do think feedback's everything. I make work in order to share it. So not that I always want critical feedback, but I do want interpretive feedback, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was gratifying to me to hear that I did get from your book largely what you intended. Is that, I think
well,
that's
this is what's so pleasing about certain kinds of new friendships, is when people like about you the things you want them to like. So when you contacted me back, I mean, I clicked on your Facebook photo that was on a friend's page simply because you're quite handsome, and then I looked through everything that you did, the art school and the podcast and some of your drawings, and that's why I friend requested you. Because it's like, I had, especially in the early days of Facebook, we used to just friend for looks.
Right.
Crazy.
Well, I escaped that. I escaped that for a long time, and I joke like, well, now the algorithm has figured me out, because it's not just cute guys, but it's like abs. Do you know what I mean? Like TNA basically. And I kind of want to go back and start from square one and just give myself a new name, because the algorithm has decided what it thinks I like.
Well, the algorithm is actually it all seems that they go through all of my friends list and get their friends of friends, because there are some people that it's like, really, I don't want to friend the sister of the cousin of someone who I barely know.
Right, the dog sister's lawyer,
But then when you just friended me back, but then you did the same thing I did. You decided to look at my page, and you investigated the book, and without having read it, you invited me on the podcast. I was like, this guy gets me. And and through our extensive early IMing, it was true. We do get each other extraordinarily, and that's increasingly rare these days. It feels increasingly rare to me, but it was very gratifying. And I just wanted to respond to something in your intro. It's that, Virginia, I think the nails are so complex from what the description is. I think you should make them into little tarot cards and then do your reading of just your nails.
That's an idea.
It is, for us talking about creativity and being creativists, I think that's a fabulous idea.
Well, the downside would be we could probably have you committed based on your fingernails, right?
There's a few times that I've done my nails that everybody looks at me like, okay.
We have had a tarot reader on, Mark. I don't know if you found that episode, but two episodes in a row, my friend Rosalind came on and did a tarot reading, and it's fascinating. It's all story, really, and it's sort of. It overlaps with the hero's journey in some really beautiful ways.
Well, my sister's best friend, who's also a good friend of mine, is an obsessive collector of tarot decks. And she has, I don't know, they're in the hundreds.
Wow.
And then, a friend of mine did gay erotic tarot cards.
Nice.
In Palm Springs. And I posed for one of them.
Nice.
Was
it Tom of Finland? Was it Tom?
There's a fair amount of bondage sort of references in it, and he's now selling them in Palm Springs. And Jonathan Chaplin Dury, I should just give him a plug. Yeah,
go for it. What's his name?
Jonathan Chaplin Dury.
Well, I'm intrigued. I'm going to Google them. Another of our guests, Greg Spalenka, who is a dear friend, and I've known him since Art Center. He was my instructor. Do you remember that, Virginia? He was doing illustrating. He's an amazing illustrator. I mean, nothing less than an American icon. And I kind of do want to illustrate a tarot deck, just because I don't know if you saw them, but Greg's images are just so evocative. And there's so many directions to go with that. I would love to do that. So, Mark, we'll do a crowdfunding, and the three of us will do a tarot deck. That's what I say.
Okay. Well, and I have looked through your illustrations on your various sites and everything, and without overdoing it with the sort of mutual compliment fan club, your illustrations are very impressive.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That is a good transition, though, because I feel like you are very versatile. Maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but seems like a multimedia artist. You have a lot of vehicles of expression. And I have noticed that can be a plus and a minus, depending on, again, how I've said, and I don't want to dwell on it, but, I've been told you're a master of, jack of all trades, master of none. Nobody knows how to market you. And it can be shamed, this idea of being versatile and adaptable. So I guess I want to start by asking, I do want to hear your story. I'm going to ask a very basic rote question, unfortunately. But do you identify as a multimedia artist or an artist with many vehicles of expression? And if so, what is the umbrella? In my case, it's definitely story. Everything has a narrative element to it. What ties all your creative efforts together, if there is any one umbrella?
A story would be good, because my art is almost all collage-y based, and the collage it's always has some personal reflections in it. I started getting into it when my sister, who's a very accomplished self-taught artist, when I would visit her up in Seattle. And it's mostly visits for the grandkids and etc. But we would always pull apart 2 or 3 days in the art cave, what I call it. And she has just tons of boxes, with things that are cut up. And I learned to just sort of do art by by spontaneity and just let the pieces choose you.
Mm.
And then she would also teach me some techniques, like let's work with the sponge, or I learned that she always wanted to give me at least one art lesson, and just not to resist that. But from all of those visits, I now have my walls are completely covered with my own art. And sometimes when I need to uh, clear the decks of my brain, I will
Mhm.
take all my art supplies out from and then do something on the. If I find a great frame in a thrift shop that needs filling, but now I have almost no wall space left, and I also recognize that my primary gift is as a writer,
Mm. Mhm.
and so I believe in creation and creativity. It makes me happy, but uh, writing and doing it the way I like to, which is a lot of rewriting,
Mhm.
a lot of editing, because I like things to be well honed. It takes a lot of time, and So anyway, love my art, very proud of it. I don't think it has tons of resale value, but that's fine. Something will happen after I die, and
Oh, right, right. We all hope for that posthumous crown and for that recognition, right? Kind of Van Gogh style would be nice.
yeah.
Now, I'm sure you're reaching people we don't always even know, right? How big our platform is, and for me, it really does boil down to if I've changed one person's life in a cornfield in Iowa, my job is done. And
Well,
I,
also my poetry, I always art it. It's always put against some image, usually of my own creation,
mhm.
uh, or original, lots of digital art. So, um, and I shared one poem with you just because it had
Beautiful.
a reference to Icarus, which
Icarus,
one of
right,
your
right,
books
right,
is
right.
about. But that poem has art uh, to it
Mm.
uh, uh, that I really enjoy putting together. It's just that
Did
over
you
the years,
include the link to the artwork? I don't remember seeing
I
the.
didn't send that. I didn't
Yeah, I
send
would
that
love.
to
I'd love
Lisa.
to see it. I'm all about Icarus. Yeah.
Yeah. I will send that to you. And the blog that I started when I started to pick up trash while walking the dog, called the Trash Whisperer, has now become where I park all my art. So that's the official archive. So you can get lost in there. It's just that it can be overwhelming even for someone who loves my poetry. You know, if you love someone's poetry and you read 5 poems in a row, it's like that's it. Because you can't possibly absorb the richness. So
Let me make sure I understand, and I do want to go back to square one for our listeners.
mhm.
I have a million things I want to follow up on, and what you just said, really, in terms of the role of creativity, creative expression, etc. But so prompt me if I don't get back to that later. But I do want to say I don't quite understand. Is it a website where other people share their found items as well, or what is the platform you were just referring to?
Oh, it's a blog.
A blog, okay.
Yeah, yeah. That so I'm the only one who posts on it,
Hmm.
but a lot of it was I found a lot of art. I found out would find notes, incredible
Right,
amounts of
right,
notes,
right.
and that I would post on the Trash Whisperer, and just observations of the day. But then
Hmm.
slowly, I occasionally I wrote poetry about once every 2 weeks, sometimes based on something that happened on one of my walks, and then I'll always arted it because I just wanted it to be each entry to be pretty, you know.
Yeah, I struggle with that too because as an illustrator, it's kind of funny. I don't want to dictate what people picture in their imaginations while they're reading. I mean, I loved the fact that I could read Wizard of Oz and picture it exactly as I wished. And then the movie kind of becomes cemented. The 1939 version becomes cemented. And same with Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings. So I never want to dictate what people are meant to picture or imagine. But yeah, it's a logical thing to do, isn't it? And
Yeah, I never felt that. I felt like it was the equivalent of a frame,
mm,
so that it just was more evocative and just more attractive to look at. But since my poetry is never that on the nose, that this, I'm illustrating this line, there's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
one
it's
or
not
two
literal.
words that are evoking something that I use in the background. So I'll send you a few samples.
Yeah, I get it. It's more of a conceptual,
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
companion. I do companion pieces that are conceptually based, but they're not so narrative that it limits the imagination.
right.
Anyway, I love that. I think I told you before, there's a guy called Dave Rothbury, and he has a magazine called Found. And I just stumbled into him here in Silver Lake. You may remember the bookstore, is it not Lighthouse? That's West Hollywood, right? Anyway, the one on Vermont, amazing bookstore. And I just have,
Yeah, a different light.
yeah, different light. And I was waiting for a movie, of course, and I just popped in there. I'm kind of a regular there, despite not being able to remember the name. And he was doing a reading, and I just fell in love with his content. It's a little bit Augustin Burroughs, a little bit a little bit David Sedaris, but he's straight, of course, and just fell in love with his work. And then I discovered his whole magazine, Found, is a lot like you said. Like he'd find a piece of paper that had been on somebody's windshield crumpled, and there would
Uh-huh.
be, a whole backstory of the breakup and cheating and
Oh
and
my
he just
God. It's like, it's, I'm at, I mean, once I feel validated and a little bit pissed, like I better have thought of that first. But it's like, it's an idea that had to be done because it's so, anyone who's observes, and, when I was picking up trash, I just would find notes on windshield wipers sometimes, like
right,
these
right.
frigging mini novels, you know, and that then I would come home, I would post on the blog, and I would write my guess of the backstory.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of breakup between street people, or the unhoused, or a clearly one clearly engaged in street in sex work,
Hustling, right?
and and some with these poetic turns of phrases,
Wow,
and
interesting.
so I'm, and then so go back to Iowa, mother, yeah, or clearly someone who just gotten out of prison, and because there was a reference, I mean, some of them were just and it just increased my uh intention. One thing that picking up trash did is it forces you to be in the present, because
Oh,
it's hard to do anything else. Your dog's there who's teaching you how to be in the present, right?
right, right.
Because you just have to
Absolutely.
watch, and then you're picking up these pieces one by one, and so you might as well look at them and look around, and learning to find beauty in the ugliness. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and realizing that's a perception you bring, but you take the right picture, and like some homeless people who are not traditionally beautiful, but you could see that they had once been gorgeous
Yeah,
in a traditional way, and then
yeah.
that invites, uh or the way, I mean, there's so much. And I live in a very gritty neighborhood in East Hollywood,
Hmm.
so it pays to be able to find beauty in what is not traditionally considered very uh, beautiful.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I think if you can find beauty in like urban sprawl, you're ahead of the game.
well, I had to find it in prison,
Right.
and
Well, I definitely want to back up now because I
okay,
feel
yeah,
like we need some context for all of this. I
Yeah.
do love, where you landed in terms of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in the rehabilitation process, the fact that you ended up serving by picking up the trash, and seemed like a little bit of a delayed reaction to your experience. But I do want to back up for the listeners, if you don't mind, and just give us, however detailed you want to be. It can be the Reader's Digest version, or you can vomit all over us. Either way. But what led you to your prison time? Because I don't think it was in the intro, unfortunately. So what led you to it? And then just tell us a little bit about your. How many days was it? How many?
286 days.
Okay, you're 286 days behind bars.
That's right.
If you don't mind.
That was one of the early titles, in fact.
Oh, really? Nice.
So I'll just tell it the way I've learned to tell it, which is probably closer to the vomitorium.
Nice. We're all about vomit here on Language of the Soul,
Yes.
please.
But what happened is, when I moved out to California, my brother and I had both recognized, found out that we were both HIV positive, and there was a feeling of clock ticking. He was a doctor.
This is Luke, right?
Yeah, Luke.
Okay.
And he had me come out to, as he said, to help him open a clinic, a plasmapheresis clinic, which was a experimental treatment for AIDS. And the state of California did not approve it. And here I was, and a screenwriter wannabe. So I was like, I'm still in the right place. And so started working here, developing the screenplay, trying to get connections, and then he died in February of 1991.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt to me very much like, okay, the clock is really ticking, especially since my T cells were going down. Mm-hmm. And every 3 months after that, after he died, a friend in New York or a new friend in LA would die. Because that was the intense time, the very early 90s. That's when the death rate went just skyrocketed.
AZT, had that come out yet, or the cocktail?
It had, but it had limited use. It was very toxic. No one
it was killing people.
Right, and so my brother refused to take it, and we wonder if at least it would have prolonged some lives until 1995, but. Alone, there was a lot of problems with it.
Of course, yeah. I mean, have you seen Dallas Buyers Club? I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, truly killing people. And
but my brother, was a very particular kind of guy who wanted to find the cure to AIDS by himself, and he tried so many different things. Selenium, garlic, which was a real problem. Because he was, I was like, take garlic pills. I can't take it. I could go on a very long list.
Colloidal silver.
Let me see. Selenium, zinc, typhoid vaccine was his big thing.
No bleach.
And, that ended up being. It didn't work, and after he died, families of patients tried to sue him. At his medical license, and he probably would have lost his medical license because it was an underground trials that he was doing. And looking back,
so sorry, I might have missed. I knew it sounded like he had a background in medicine. Was he a doctor?
He was a doctor. He was an AIDS doctor.
Okay.
Who had to sometimes prescribe things he didn't believe in. I mean, because he wasn't going to say, drink a glass of urine a day. It works for me. He was on a macrobiotic diet. I mean, he was a quirky, eccentric guy.
Was he working with Gladstein, or I guess it's Gladstein, the guys at APLA, Michael Gottlieb.
Here Medical Group, which was one of the big AIDS practices. Mm-hmm. Then that turned into Keith Lim, and then Jess Lim, and I ended up staying the patient of Dr. Lim for up until when he retired just 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. But so after he died, he left $10,000 in the bank, which was a lot for me. I wasn't ready to get a new roommate because we lived together in Hollywood. So his bank was in San Diego because that's where we lived before. And I just, he had told me to write checks for him when he was in the hospital and handling bills. And I just didn't close his account, and I kept writing checks on it. And his disability checks kept coming, and I neglected, to tell them that he was dead. And I found out that the assumption was that the funeral home tells everybody, but maybe they do that now. But this was pre-internet, and I found out that I found a loophole. And so 6 months later, after these huge disability checks, which allowed me to pay off my own credit cards, and then I started using, uh, and then my credit went much higher, and I used his credit cards. I was able to pay them off, and my credit got higher and higher. Um, and finally, and I rationalized it all. I gave one car to my sister, his car to my sister, one sister, and the other sister, wife of a doctor. She didn't need it, but I should have. The right thing, obviously, would have been to share whatever he left with my sisters. Um,
Were you responsible for the estate?
yes, I was.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of normal. I mean, some of it is not.
No,
So,
yeah, but I was a great rationalizer, as my mother said, because it was like, you're on the 2-year plan, and I wanted to
mm,
live well. I wanted to do some things.
mhm.
So, for example, I ended up going to London that year for Christmas with my mother because she just needed to do something else, and she was visited a friend. And then the next year,
Mhm.
I did the same thing with France, and it was all very rationalizable in my mind. And
Mhm.
finally, when his credit card uh, just went a little uh, to the max, I I found out that I could take his death certificate and get a graphic artist friend to forge it and just change the date of his death to be 2 years after,
Mhm.
and boom, it was paid off because I had checked the insure your credit card things.
Right.
Um, and this little modality was something that I would use. But the big thing was that just right after he died, he literally got in the mail a renewal for his license. And this is where creativity is not always great when you got the tough touch of the evil genius in you,
Right.
and you're facing a terminal illness, and your T cells are going down, and all your friends are dying, like really good friends, once every 3 months,
Mhm.
literally. The only mercy that they were weirdly spaced out, so that I could
Mm,
catch my breath for a month. So
mm.
I went down to the DMV, and I just we looked just enough alike, and I handed in his whole old license, and she looked at it, she glanced at it, glanced up at me, and then put it in the pile and says, "Okay, step and get your picture taken." So I got a new license with his name on it and my face, and and my fingerprint on it. So now it made it very easy to sort of have a double life. Um, uh, you know, where I could pay off his credit cards as me, and his my credit cards as him. Uh, uh, and I felt, looking back, psychically speaking, I think instead of really feeling the horrific grief of the loss of a sibling, not only did I use and drink over it, but that I was keeping him alive on paper.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a little easier than really feeling the grief. Uh, uh, I mean, I felt it, but I didn't really, because for some of my friends where I had let myself go there, like crying jags that you couldn't stop. And
Mhm.
afterwards, instead of feeling cathartic and healing, for me, it was like, man, you just ripped open the scar and it'll take you weeks to get. And so I learned to not go there.
Mhm.
Um, that's why I hate memorial services, and I don't want anyone to come to mind because I think they're wrenching. They're supposed to be a healing, but not to me.
Mhm.
I'll pen a fabulous eulogy, which I did for many of them, and now you can do that on Facebook. But anyway, so this double life continued for 10 years, and uh, I kept thinking, oh my God, this is the last time I do something. I got some viatical settlements, and I was able to pay off on my credit cards, and I said, okay, that's the last I do it. But I got my dream job, which was an editor of genre magazine.
Mhm.
managing editor, and that paid 19,000 alike, and I couldn't live off that.
Right.
So I filled out the paperwork as my brother. I kept his account. I got paid as him, and I still had the disability from Mark, which I was still getting because I had gotten full blown AIDS in 1993. And when you get viatical settlements, which basically say we guarantee his doctors that he has less than 24 months to live, you know, I just kept living,
Right.
shockingly, and I didn't do anything particularly right, because I was a big party boy.
Mm.
Again, could rationalize it. Anyway, the meth started creeping up. So there's the job at Genre, which I absolutely loved. Then they moved to New York, and I didn't, and I lost the job, and I lost. There's the screenplay that I'd been working on. The first director died after Whoopi Goldberg agreed to be in it. I found another director. Um, then he died, Norman Renee, and so he died of AIDS. The first director was straight. He died of lung cancer. But I had these blows, these professional blows. So the 90s was the most roller coaster decade of any life imaginable, you know. So after Genre, I just started doing more and more meth. And, it crept up from, um, let me just get a little extra for the weekend and I'll sell a few quarters to my good friends. And then you found out if you bought a step up, an eighth of an ounce, or you go up, that you could actually start to make a little bit of money. And I discovered the pleasure of fast cash. Wow, what a frigging addiction. And also, I was really good at it. It was fun to build a business. I answered on the first ring. You got your stuff immediately. And I discovered I'd always wondered what would it be like if you could get high as you could possibly want to. And um, in a way, I'm glad that I went through that experience because now I know exactly what it's like. You know, and it works for about 18 months, and then your brain
Mm.
becomes uh, like a dirty sponge. You can't. The endorphins won't work anymore. The dopamine receptors are clogged and sogged, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the final addiction was after alcohol, which I used to drink also, and then I drank less because the meth replaced it, and then um, uh, getting away, and then fast cash. The last one was getting away with things, and I got away with
Mm.
the ultimate thing, which is like I was supposed to die every
Mhm.
year,
Mhm.
and I kept so I developed this sort of a psychology of consequences are for other people.
Mm.
Mm.
And I found out the hard way when I was arrested,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that I still didn't accept it until prison. But so that was a big consequence. And, I got a slap on the wrist because I was a first time offender. And, I had to pay a fine and pee in a cup once a week
Mm.
and even that was too much of a consequence, mostly because I wasn't ready to. Uh,
To pee in a cup?
I wasn't ready to embrace sobriety.
Okay.
I wasn't ready yet. Plus, I had all these barnacles living with me and friends who depended on me both financially and for the meth. And it's very hard to say, okay, you have to be willing to have total upheaval in your life to get sober.
I was waiting till I want to hear it all. I want to hear about prison, and I was gonna not jump in with questions, but I just have to at this point. So there is the idea in recovery, right, or AA, that you have to hit bottom. It can't be court ordered. You have to want it for yourself. You can't do it for your partner, right? And so there is that kind of sentiment that you have to want it for yourself. I also have often written about what if one person hangs in there and believes in you? That could make all the difference for an individual. Where do you fall on that, if that makes sense? I know Erica, is that your sister, Erica?
Both sisters knew that I was doing meth. They certainly didn't know I was dealing. And uh, I had developed such a skill at the double life and the lying. And, I was just a consummate liar and to institutions, etc. So there was no one. Now, in the sort of novel I want to write, based on the idea of what if Luke had lived, my brother,
Mm.
he would definitely have not. None of this would have happened at all. Well, plus I wouldn't have been reacting to his death on some level, or taken his ID. I mean,
Right,
it never
right.
occurred to me. But he if I'd gotten into Crystal anyway, up to a point, he would have intervened. He would have gotten me into rehab. There's no doubt about it. There would have been an intervention. And so my life would have been very different. Um, so, and the irony is, well, first I had my last big crime, which is when I was being summoned to meet up for a parole officer. And I didn't want to. I just sent in my own death certificate, forged, posing as Luke, shocked to come down from Seattle and to found out that there was any meeting with a parole officer whatsoever, and the family was shocked. I sent in that, and they sent me back the loveliest note saying, "We're so sorry for your loss, and the case is closed." And so I was like, "Wow, I don't really."
Okay, let me make sure I'm following, because this is news to me. I knew a lot of this, but
Yeah,
so you officially became Luke and you declared Mark dead.
just to the West Hollywood Police Department.
Okay.
The thing
Wow,
is,
that's amazing.
and to the judge. The thing is, if you,
I think it's called identity theft, basically.
that was, but this is called faking your own death.
Right, amazing.
Okay, it's a step above. And the thing is, if you fake your own death, you need to move from your apartment.
Right.
But it was a rent controlled, rent stabilized West Hollywood apartment, 2 bedrooms for $625 a month. Fuck that shit. So, and it's clear to me now that I was just pushing the envelope, because I needed a prison. Ended up being something I could have totally avoided, but it was the closest thing to death
Mm-hmm.
that I could possibly get.
I have to jump in here. That is the most intriguing thing I've learned, and again, I'm completely overwhelmed, but in, kind of listening to you in other interviews, reading the book, listening to you here today, I will say that is the most intriguing part of it is, and I think one of the interviews you said, or maybe it was in the book itself, but of course you said prison was the closest thing to death, but basically you cheated death. And so maybe in an unexamined way, in testing the boundaries the way you're describing it, you were self-destructing. Does that make sense?
Well, I was looking for some sort of closure
Well,
from,
the way you put it, I think, again, was it in the book or in an interview? But you said when you write off your next chapter and you actually think you've got a built-in expiration date, you have a bunch of empty pages that you need to put back in when you realize you're going to live. So I just think it's fascinating that in a way you may have cheated death or circumvented it, but then you absolutely pushed yourself toward the closest thing to death, which would be prison.
so there could be an end, a renewal, a beginning. The AIDS drugs were online. It was clear that it was not going to necessarily kill me, but my brain had altered
Right.
over those years.
Yeah.
And what happens is that you have no idea how much space the future takes up in your brain very quietly. And since I was sure I was going to die, I consciously battled that and literally shrunk that space. And
Do you feel like
I'm in
sometimes
the present.
Yeah, I even in high school I started writing a musical about basically right now. It feels like the end times and we're going to hell in a handbasket, and decadence does set in when there's sort of a doom and gloom feeling in society. I think, the roaring 20s were seen as sort of
Yeah.
that. And so yeah, I don't know. I think that you just party hard and you become a hedonist when there is no future that you can
Well,
rely
and the
on.
thing is, I discovered meth, which is the best drug in the world if you want to live in the present. Because for
Hmm.
me, it was like you get high, I pull on my chaps, get on the hardcore line or on the computer, and someone would be over pretty soon. For it was like it supercharges the libido so much,
Mm.
and then there was a whole subculture of gay men in West Hollywood, Silver Lake. They were all going through the same thing, and
Right.
it takes a while before it really fucks up your life. But
Mm.
eventually, the irony is that I remember the last 2 weeks before my second arrest, when they discovered that they discovered that I was still dealing and I hadn't died, um, that I couldn't get high anymore. And I was the closest I've ever been to sobriety, to just saying, you know what, I'm doing this as long as it's fun, but it's not fun anymore. You know,
What do you suppose the significance of that is? I've said, because I was a stoner in junior high and I actually quit pot at 17. I continued to do shrooms and acid, throughout college. But I do remember even at 17, I said, I'm not getting high anymore. I've tried Sens, Indica, homegrown. I've tried, more or less, smoked the whole dime bag. Nothing worked. But I came to the conclusion, my subconscious knew it wasn't for me. And it kind of pushed me, if that makes sense. What is the significance for you of the fact that you just couldn't get high anymore? Had you burned
well,
out all your synapses? Had you,
yeah. Listen, it's like the sponge analogy. A wet sponge can no longer pick up any more water.
Mhm.
Your brain literally was like, my dopamine receptors,
Right.
are
You
gone.
maxed you maxed them out. Yeah.
So when I got to prison, I was ready to be sober. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, or fortunately, you experience something called anhedonia, which is a lot of trouble experiencing any pleasure.
Mhm.
And uh, when I tried to get sober before, get clean, like once I was in the hospital for CMV, and when I came out, I felt so gray for 3 weeks. And I thought that's what sobriety would be like.
Mhm.
And if I'd gone into the program and have people to hold my hands and explain to me, I would have realized that you just have to wait. You have to wait a good 6 months for your brain to get uh, uh, feel pleasure again.
Right,
And
right.
then I had to do that in prison. Um, so, but gradually, as I made prison work for me, um, by writing,
Mhm.
uh, by writing my way through it. Uh, my brain started to fix itself, but I was physically cut off from the drugs, so it was a good place for me to get sober because I couldn't
Mhm.
just relapse. You know, I could have, if I really wanted to, found drugs there, but I was just not that stupid.
What is the withdrawal process like for meth? Is it certainly couldn't be like heroin where you get the
No,
shakes
it's
and
not anywhere like heroin. And I was in suicide lockdown for the week after I was arrested, and that was the purest bottom.
mm,
Simply because they don't give you anything not to read,
mm,
which drove me crazy. They take my glasses, so I couldn't even watch TV across the um, giant room where you were housed. It's like a three-story tiered thing where all the mostly crazies are behind these glass
Mm.
uh, enclosures, and they didn't give you a toothbrush even, and that was, I tell you, I will never ever take for granted that I can brush my teeth because it is horrible, but
mhm.
but there was just me and my brain, and
Right.
so just the attempt to, I would sing every song I'd ever thought of, and then I would start talking to whoever came into my brain, and I had these long conversations with my dead uncle uh, that were no doubt uh, from my imagination. I don't think he was really talking through me, but the fact that I was doing story,
Mm.
Mhm.
it was like that was my first steps of battling my brain, which had become so attuned to just sensual gratification.
Okay, I want to jump in. I totally was just going to wait and then come back with questions, but as
Mhm.
long, I
No,
think it's
no,
working out to be, it's logical to ask questions in the moment. So I would say, the terms are kind of interchangeable, kind of not, but we all have dark nights of the soul. We have come to Jesus moments, right? We hit bottom. That seems like a forced timeout, right? If that is, it sounded like that was bottom for you, even within the prison context, right? That was bottom. It seems a little too, it couldn't be by design on the part of, right, the prison system. Do you think there's any wisdom behind that? Like, let's really have this person either atone or reflect or
no. They
introspect.
listen. They're just covering their ass. They asked me if I had any suicidal thoughts. And in my little crazy mind, I was like, the judge is going to see this and he's going to go easy on me and not
Mm,
put me into prison, and he's going to put me into a rehab. And instead, uh, they just don't want to have a suicide in their hands, and it looks
right,
bad.
right.
So they
Yeah,
just
I thought
put me,
that's giving them way too much credit to think, because even we'll talk about this later, but rehabilitation is a fantasy that I think sometimes.
especially in county jail where
Right,
they
right.
just,
Mhm.
I wanted to terribly to tell them they made a mistake, and I wanted to go into Gen Pop, and um, they would not let me see the psychiatrist until a week. It was 7 days. That's it. And
Hmm.
then as soon as I saw her, she was like, I always thought she was like, "Oh, this job is so much shittier than I ever hoped." Yeah.
Right.
She came in all idealistic, but within 2 seconds, she was like, "Okay, you're fine. Sign me out."
Wow.
And so I was so frigging relieved. And so, but to go that far down, every step in the next step in the prison system, I could find advantages that, at least I always had a toothbrush.
I
Um,
was gonna say, so do you find it a blessing that you were in solitary straight out the gate because it was only up from there for the rest of your term, your prison
yeah,
sentence?
I think I needed to find a very pure bottom.
Hmm.
Uh, I look at I'm a very much a make lemonade from lemons sort
Hmm.
of person, and it dates back from a long time. So that when I
Hmm.
had AIDS, and I had a 2 year uh, uh, terminal date,
Hmm.
expected
Right,
date of
right.
survival, I was all right. Well, who do I can steal the identity of my dead brother. He's not going to get upset.
Mm.
And do this victimless crime that will allow me to go to Spain, will allow me to go to France, will allow me to go to have a great life that I have to pack in to this short period of time.
Mhm.
So um, and I used to think, wow, how great that I'm not going to have uh, the decrepitude of age
Mhm, mhm.
or illness. I mean, I just tried to reframe everything. And so within prison, uh, rapidly, what happened is that my sister was just like blown away by the letters I was sending home.
Mhm.
She says, I want to put them on a blog. And so I would send her my letter of the day, my account of what was going on around me, and she would type it up and put it on a blog, so
Mhm.
that I was one of the very a few other people have done this. I've since found out, but really very rarely that all my friends who were very, very concerned, obviously, and who had no idea, most of them, certainly my New York friends, of what was going on, were able to follow my experience real time. But
Mhm.
more importantly, is the act of observing what was going on around me. taught me how to be in the present without drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
Yeah.
can learn to be in the present in prison, you can learn to live your life in the present.
Nice.
And that's why my life since then, yeah, prison was a blessing in disguise. Plus, it produced this book that I can't imagine my life without. Now, if I had to do it all over again, would I make different choices and avoid it? And just write a sequel to Gone with the Wind is my first choice.
Right.
Yes, I would.
Right.
Well,
But I still, that book really does, in a way, justify everything.
well, I was gonna say, Mark, what I think is pretty amazing is you're talking about this too, is about being present, is that, and I know Dominic and I both meditate, and we usually try and do, we try and do that before we do our podcast here and stuff, so we can get in the right frame of mind. I mean, that's something, unless you set out to really do, and it takes time to really hone that skill. I mean, the fact that you went, and I understand crystal meth because I actually, my first partner, ironically, in the early 90s, got involved in crystal meth. So I had gone through that process with them. And yeah, so the fact that coming from that state of mind and finding that coping mechanism of being present and being mindful of what was going on with you and in the environment you're in, which happens to be prison, I find so fascinating that you were intuitive enough to draw on that.
Well, and also, I mean, and I didn't necessarily know that I was doing it at the time, but the magical thing that happened is that uh, I swear to you, I don't know what energy. Once I knew that I was writing for an audience of the 12 people who were following the blog, or just for my sister.
Mm.
But the letters changed in tone. They became more writerly with an awareness that you know, it's like the inmates got the memo that they needed to step up and create a short story for me every single day.
That's so funny. Yeah.
And then when they actually found out about it, everyone wanted to be in it
Mhm.
because it's
Well, actually,
like,
that's a good transition. I'm sure you've heard of the documentary, if not seen it, Shakespeare in Prison. Have you guys seen that?
I have.
I just saw the Coleman Domingo movie about Sing Sing, which is
Mm.
very sort of about that program. Yeah.
Well, oh, okay, yeah. So it's I think a step in the right direction in terms of this fantasy of rehabilitation. So I just think in the spirit of the podcast, creativity is the answer for a lot of things. So I do want to jump in. I'm sure we'll get back to. I do want to know how the letters translated into the book and how closely you honored the letters themselves, because I'm a little confused about that. I guess I'll just ask that straight out right now. You didn't verbatim turn the letters into this memoir, correct?
Not verbatim. When I first got out, I thought that's what I was going to do, and I tried, and I realized that a lot of the tone of it was not as literary as I imagined it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I had the biggest problem putting them together, and I think part of it was that I couldn't bear my mom. She would want to read my book, and I couldn't bear the idea of her reading it
Mm-hmm.
and reliving all of it.
Right.
And so I got a master's, I did the blog, I did hat tricking, I was doing some translation work on the side. And every year I was like, fuck, when am I gonna put these together? And I know there's a book. And literally the month after she died in 2015, I just cleared the decks and it freed me somehow. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was able to take each letter, which my sister had put all in uh, a notebook for me, but also I had everything she typed up, and I would just take each entry and I would just rewrite it to make it a bit more literary. But a lot of it was verbatim. And I would throw out some things, and I would throw out some detours I would go on, but but basically, it's very, very close to what the blog was,
Got it.
and it's epistolatory. So each little chapters was the first two sides of the front and back of a letter. Usually, that's where I would stop, and then sometimes a little longer. But um, uh, but it took me. I was embarrassed that it took me so long after prison.
Well, here I'm going to jump in because I think it is fascinating that you felt freed up to write it once your mother passed.
Yeah.
And I think that's fairly universal, right? I mean, especially when there's a tell-all book, right? For some reason, the Tatum O'Neills, and I guess she didn't wait till Ryan died, but like Mommy Dearest, that sort of thing. They feel freer once the person's gone. I don't really parse that. I feel like my mom's still around and, watching from above, and legacy matters to me. So I think I try to be honest in my writing no matter what, but do it from a place of love. But
Well,
what
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, there was a secondary consideration. It's like every time I tried to put it together, I felt that the reader was going to go, well, I'm fascinated by your experience in prison, but I need to know why you got there. And so
Yep.
I tried to fit that in. I mean, look how long it took me just to tell you the the broad strokes here, and I would try to replicate that, and it was like that first chapter just got longer and longer, and I was like, Mark, you have to write that as a full book before you
Right.
write the prison thing.
Right.
Otherwise,
Well,
it won't make
yep.
sense.
Well,
And
we're
that's
we're
what
more objective because we can see the forest for the trees, right? So I do want to jump in. I think it's for our writers. We have listeners that I assume are writers, and we've had Rob Zabrecki come on and talk about his process of writing his autobiography, and I totally relate 100%, Mark. When I'm capable of doing narrative nonfiction essays where it's a chunk of my life. I'm very clear about the themes and what I want to say with it and how I want to illustrate it. But it is so daunting and overwhelming for me to even consider writing a full memoir or autobiography. I can do it when I commit to a theme, right? Because I generally go, wow, is my life a tragedy or a cautionary tale, or should I tell the victorious version? There's a million lenses you could swap out, right? And so I always find, oh, okay, I can commit to a theme like the gay thing. So if I was able, the longest narrative nonfiction essay that's bordering on memoir only worked because I was able to commit to a theme, the progress in terms of representation, right, and tolerance and for diversity, all of that. So it's totally relatable. There's no judgment on it when I say you were freed up the moment your mother passed. What I wanted to get at is it does seem, I mean, the book is really beautifully written in that I think one of the things I said that you liked because it was in line with your intention was it's an exercise in finding your compassion and suspending judgment, right? You're presenting us with a lot of really prickly but really lovable characters. And so I find, wow, it's really easy to fall in love with these very faulted people. And I think that was your intention, correct? Kind of showing their redeeming qualities.
It also, yes, but it was also uh, a way to get back deeply the gratitude I had. I mean, once I got 7 letters in one day, all from friends or relatives, and you get the guard would pass out letters, and he'd skip most bunks because a lot of people didn't get anything, and then maybe one letter here and one. And when he said uh, he gave me 7, and I was like, someone yelled out, "Man, if I was loved that much, I would never be here." And it was, oh my God, it's the truth. And in my head, I was like, yeah, but I'm particularly gifted at fucking up. But I was aware that the advantages that I had had, being educated and fairly, the gay thing was a little dramatic in 1975. Another story that I put and used in my student film that I sent the other day, uh, but it made me aware that I had to step out of this. When you're very well loved as a child,
Hmm.
you proceed through life with a basic sense of I'm okay, right? And when you're not, as most of these men weren't, uh, I had to say, well, try to emphasize and imagine where
Hmm.
they're coming from.
Hmm.
And so that infused a lot of their bad behavior.
Right.
uh, you know, uh, uh, it wasn't too hard to find compassion. And I had to go, and I'd gone to it. There were a lot of black men around you, and you're supposed to be afraid of them. And I had been raised. I went to a very heavily black high school, and I always had seriously very close black friends. I lived with two for many years, so I didn't have this inherent fear of them as black people.
Hmm.
But they were also, and they um, looked at me and saw how marginalized I was by the other whites.
Right, right. So there's an identification
Well,
there.
and they felt bad for me, and they said, "Now you know how we feel, right?"
Well,
And
sometimes the African American community doesn't like the comparisons with the gay community, right? You've heard that mentality.
well, that's true. But the thing is that when we were our bunks were always next to each other because they do intersperse the bunk.
Mhm.
Your bunkies always of your same race, but I had black guys on the left of me and black guys on the right, and conversations erupt. And the thing is that uh, they felt that they were safe from the gay because it was a white disease; they couldn't get it,
Mhm.
and it served as a weird passport. But they felt kind of bad. It's like, man, they're shitty to you, and I was like, damn right, they're shitty to me. And uh, just the idea of being marginalized,
Right, exactly. Yep.
that one thing, and then they were all really curious, and they all wanted to know, but they couldn't understand how. If I had the choice between men and women, that I would choose men, and so I would explain so much to them about
I was
homosexuality.
going to say, did that ever get tiresome? I call it hand holding. I've kind of grew out of that a long time ago, bringing people along on the journey of the gay experience. Did it ever get old, or were you glad to do that?
I would warn them that if they were going to bring in the Bible,
Right.
just don't even bother, don't even try.
Yeah, because it becomes a not a circular conversation, but it becomes one where you have to talk on one person's terms or the other, right? If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I just had to say, well, that's fine that you believe that, but that's not my experience. And no, I would not take a pill. And they were amazed by that. But I also was aware that there were a few silent ones watching who were on the down low.
Right.
And there were
Yeah,
some
that's
who were curious.
the whole other podcast about prison sex and how malleable, right? People love to think women are fluid, but men aren't. Well, actually, right? If you factor in,
No, but they were on the down low, but they were actually gay on the outside.
right.
But some who were just curious, and then a lot of them who had just never seen a proud gay person before.
Right. Yeah.
They had seen a few in their community, but they were always very secretive and very, uh, and so, and then I found the black guys were sort of had the most interesting backstories. Um, uh, and I would have these conversations, and I would have to spin. I remember thinking, man, if I had to ask for anyone to babysit my child, it would be those four guys who the way they play cards was so cool, and because they had all been raised in these households where it takes a village, and they have their mom and their grandma and their auntie, and everyone takes care of each other, and it just gave me an insight into black culture. Um,
Mhm.
uh, and and how can you judge anyone in prison when you're there too? The only
Oh, yeah.
difference,
That's
yeah, the only difference is that I was the one who was completely guilty and said I was completely guilty, and most of them usually had some story why they weren't. So
yeah. I think that's what I said in my review. Was it does make the reader really consider, was somebody just dealt a shitty hand, right? Is it you think about nature and nurture, you think about privileged, a stacked system. It is really hard to judge when you can't nail anyone, on how they ended up where they are. So I will be honest, you didn't include too much in the beginning about your household or your upbringing, but I got a real fondness that your parents seemed awesome. I'm not going to call it privilege, but there was a lot of love there. So I do wonder how somebody kind of self-destructs. You've described the mechanics of that, right? When you have this whole chapter that you had written off, and now suddenly you got to fill in those pages. It seemed to me the arc seems to be you magically created the circumstances in which you could get as close to death as possible, meaning imprisoned, right? And that was a form of self-destruction. I also see that you did get in touch with your creativity and found a healthy outlet for your self-expression later. And I see that as your redemption a little bit. But I guess what I want to get to is I am fighting myself thinking, well, I'm lucky I'm not addictive. I come from a long line of alcoholics, right? But I've always identified in my adult life as a cycle breaker. So in kind of trying to work that out, like how does one person fall victim to their demons whereas another doesn't? So I guess at the very end, when you started talking about, I think both your mom and your aunt had some trauma from, the days when the Nazis were taking over Paris, basically, right? Some World War II trauma. Do you see in your case, is there self-medication, not just for mood control, right? Not just for depression and anxiety, but do you see that intergenerational trauma is playing a role at all in your self-destruction?
Well, there's a slight element of it, but for me, a few years ago, 6 years ago, I discovered that uh, they were lifting the statute of limitations for having been um, reporting
Right.
molestation, right?
Mhm.
And uh, I was molested in 1970 in the Boy Scouts, and as part of uh, of 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 my I had to give them a very clear testimony of everything that happened,
Right.
um, and uh, it was the event itself was not that traumatic. I didn't think so at the time,
Right, of
but
course.
look, finding out that this guy was in prison and had actually murdered a kid
Holy crap.
afterwards
Mm.
was I was like, oh, uh, you were actually in danger. But
Mm.
when I started to write about it, and I started to realize that there was cascading consequences from that
Hmm.
my whole
Of
life.
course. Yep.
I mean, I told my parents, and they didn't. They responded a little bit like, in it's called Absence. What's the one with Meryl Streep? Streep is the nurse, very famous play, and Viola Davis, and she tells
Oh, yeah, I
in
love that.
church, yeah, and basically, my parents sensed that there was this a little gay boy emerging, and they wanted him to go back, not emerge,
Right.
and so my mother just said, "Well, are you okay?" And
Was
I said,
that Doubt, the play that became the
"Doubt,
movie
yes,
Doubt?
that's it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Viola's monologue is just heart-wrenching.
It's right." And "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And of course, I didn't want to describe what happened to my mom. And my father, in his wasp way, just decided um, that he called in that to make sure Chuck Falco's contract wouldn't be renewed.
Mhm.
Now, in fact, this guy was doing this all over the camp and threatening, and the head of the camp knew it, and they threatened him, and he was very threatening. He was a World War I Vietnam, and they were all World War. It was a Vietnam vet, and they were all scared to death of him. So, but he could have. My parents could have prevented perhaps a lot more
Mhm.
damage. But my mother
I was
said,
gonna
"Look,
say, unfortunately, there are way too many stories like that.
Mhm.
Really, everybody my age, and I think you have 10 years on me, Mark, but everybody my age was told to just shut up about it, and carry it around and suck it up. I think
well, my mother said, well, we thought about it, but we didn't want to for you to be traumatized."
traumatize you further. Yeah.
And by retelling it, and the thing is that it never seemed to occur to them that this was couldn't have been a one-off. That these men are pedophiles,
Right.
groom one after the other after the other,
Yeah.
and the thing is, I told the truth, and I didn't get protection from it.
Right. Yep.
And so when I realized I was gay, uh, which came very soon after, in high school, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to tell the truth because I'll be taken to psychiatrist. I'll be all sorts
Mm,
of call me
mhm.
fat. And so I started lying about it. And I was like, if you're going to lie about it, might as well lie about it. Well, so I was very dapper with the ladies. And of
Mm.
course, as a young gay man, I was more comfortable with the women, and I was very funny. And they were all like, "Man, how does he date these girls that we can't even get close to?" Because
Mhm.
this was pre-Oprah, I call it. And so
Right.
they nowadays, or just 10 years later, they would have gotten that I was popular, but they didn't for the with the girls because I was gay. But
Right.
it went by, and my mother was reassured, etc. So then, when I was sent to France, then I started going into the city when I was 16, and I had a little double gay life on the weekends, and I lied up a storm about it. I invented a fictitious circle of friends. It made me feel powerful. I felt like I wouldn't have to lie in a correct world. I could be able to tell the truth. So I'm taking my power back. And then
Mm.
I went to France and I met this, 28-year-old guy and fell in love with him. And his name was Rene. And I just wrote back to to my family that I had met Rene with two E's, which is
Right.
why I had responded to your
My
sister's
sister.
name.
Yeah. Right.
No
One
accent,
E.
no
One E.
second
Right.
E.
Right.
Like,
Well, there
that
should
was,
be there's supposed to be an accent, but yeah, I don't.
and a second E for the
Right.
female.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just got a kick out of that because that was very essential. Now my mother said, I'm going to come visit you in France, and I had to write her out of my life, and
Mhm.
it exploded when
Well,
she.
I want to jump in. I mean, I've noticed that my gay friends that say yes, I got very comfortable being inauthentic, or that's a nice way of putting it, right? Or lying, getting
Uh-huh.
comfortable lying. I also, again, they might be the 10-year age difference, but when I was coming up, Disney was a fag magnet. So I was with a lover, lived with a lover all through college from to the age of 21 when I started at Disney. And so I wasn't officially out, but then my worlds were colliding. I thought, well, what if my parents come to an art opening here at Disney and I'm out at work? And I just didn't want them hearing it from the wrong person. So I took that step of officially coming out. I just assumed everybody knew. Kind of surprising, right? The denial is not just a river in Egypt. So it was a whole process that was important to me at the time. But I guess my point is, I wrote a whole essay at 21, surrounded by amazing role models at Disney. Like you said, people that don't apologize for being gay, that own it. And this was early 90s. So it had been all the talk shows, right? But it wasn't the norm. So I wrote basically an essay that said, I have not been taxed by my experience. Here's what I've gained by being gay: the character. When you are marginalized and you're forced, and alienated, frankly, throughout junior high and high school, you're forced to be introspective. That builds character. But you know what? Pretty soon, all those 13-year-long relationships or 20-year relationships that were models to me started breaking up. I started seeing the dark underbelly of West Hollywood and the meth and that self destruction, if that makes sense. So I decided there's pain in equal measure. There's character, but there's also pain in equal measure. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I noticed at some point those that identify with being a chameleon or being inauthentic happen to be actors also. So my actor friends will say, I had to quit acting because I didn't know who the fuck I was anymore. You go into an audition and you have to be all things to all people. So I kind of, I don't know what the ingredient is, but I think there are gay men that identify with being more courageous and more authentic and more honest because they're called upon to do so. Do you know what I mean? I don't identify with the lying thing. I guess I'm lucky my blue collar Italian thug of a father didn't put me out to pasture or disown me. Does that make sense? What do you think the difference is there?
Well, there are two things. After after France and after it was all out, uh, I never went back in the closet again.
Mm,
Uh, what I did lie about to my mother during the 80s, I would go home a lot. Is like she didn't realize that the extent of my promiscuity or my drinking or my drug use. So I did
Which
lie.
have nothing to do with being gay, by the way. I mean, other
No,
than
no,
the extra
but
trauma, the added
except that,
trauma.
except that in the gay milieu, there's a lot of people also partying and having fun, and whether it's because we're medicating a trauma,
Hmm.
but I had already established a real capacity for the ability to lie that just kicked in after my brother died. I
Yeah.
never really lost it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that what I would say about coming out, certainly in my generation, is that in the process of going from God, I'm not of that self beating up after jerking off and saying tomorrow you're going to be attracted to women and you're never going to think of another guy again. Uh, To go from there, which I did from, I thought I had a long dark night of the soul, but it really only took me, uh, 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 I don't know, 18 months.
Hmm.
Um, but where I finally, in order to get to self acceptance, you have to question everything that society tells you about everything.
Hmm.
Right. So that's the power of coming out, is that you're like, we're trained to have this heteronormative idea that you're going to find your soulmate and live happily ever after. And it's like, no, I can see how this doesn't work for a lot of people. And I don't know who's going to be more husband or wife, but we're going to have the roles that we discover for each other, right? So it gives you an incredible freedom. And I think with the
Hmm.
arts, that the effect is that once you come out and you start seeing everything from an angle, you know my straight friends, particularly the girls who were, have a wedding and get married and have kids, um and I'm like, I'm questioning everything, and artistically I'm seeing everything at an angle. And uh I think that's why gays are so creative, uh because I don't care how advanced your family is. Even today, you have to go from, oh my God, I might be different, to being self-affirming, and you learn to
Hmm.
question
Hmm.
so much. Um,
Yeah, I think I've often I mean, I think it's true when you have a unique experience on the planet that isn't heteronormative, right? Or you have some kind of neurodivergence or whatever, it
mhm,
does give you that gift of a unique perspective in life, right? But I
mhm,
I also think that maybe creativity is the flip side of the gate gene, or or if you believe in epigenetics and it's not actually a gene that can be identified on the strand, the nurturing of those methyl groups is, you got to be creative to fucking survive. Gays have been creative throughout the ages to stay alive. So that's kind of a little premise of mine. That's
well,
why.
and as I says on the back of my book, I learned in prison that creativity could be an incredible survival tool.
Absolutely, exactly, yeah.
And one of
But I
the
mean, I could
ways,
see now. This is the first time
yeah,
it's ever occurred to me, but I could see how that could lapse into fabricating a convenient truth based on rationalization. I don't identify as being dishonest, but some of the gay people I've met that have, that is a form of creativity. Embroidering the truth is a form of creativity. That's a tangent. But I will say I've had not a front row seat to meth addiction, or just call it what you want, self-medicating pain through drugs, but I consciously, nah, maybe subconsciously, just never chose to move to West Hollywood for that reason. I think Silver Lake was like as far as I was willing to go, if that makes sense, because it was the healthy couples that owned homes, and I was in a gay community, but I didn't have to witness all that. Of course, I did over time. I remember being at a pool party, and it descended into an orgy, but that's when I got up and left, and some kid, I don't remember what it was, but he was younger than I at the time, just spouting cynicism right and left. And there is an inculcation. You hinted at this idea that we don't take our relationship models from the mainstream. We're free to invent our own. But then there's this rhetoric of like, oh, you've been brainwashed by the mainstream community. The world is our oyster. Okay, but the human heart, I've always said in my writing, the human heart actually works the same way, straight or gay. So propriety, jealousy, all those things exist for a reason, even if you're not going to be the breadwinner protecting your brood, I'm a little off topic here, but anyway, this kid I might have said something about, well, that seems kind of cynical. And he literally said, don't worry, you'll be just like me one day. So I never bought any of the tropes that I was being spoon fed from the gay community. Does that make any sense at all? I avoided them at all costs, actually.
Yeah, listen, I've always felt that I was attracted to all the people in my life. One of the major attractions to is that they don't conform to any stereotypes, um, or very little. And I love originality and original people, and I just find that that was easier to find uh, in the gay community. Sometimes than in the straight community. But I do find that straight people sort of catch up to us. And then you get to know them because they have the life experience that was laid out for them. And then they discover the hard way. That's why, all my best girlfriends, they are all divorced at least once.
Right.
And almost all. So the other thing is that seeing things at an angle helped me with sense of humor, because I could my father, who drank too much, would always ruin jokes. He would tell them at the dinner table, everyone would stop, and he'd always forget some element to make it funny, right?
Oh.
And so the punchline would fall flat. It would be feel uncomfortable, and I learned to come up with the one liner that would save it, and make it look like he was almost like it was a setup act, like he was
Right. He spiked it.
Johnny Carson, right? I became so good at that, and that I attribute partially to my gayness.
Yeah, quippiness and wittiness. It's really valued.
I could find the joke, and in prison, that was so helpful, because mean guys who are looking at you, askance, and are not looking at you favorably for what they assume to be gay. If you can make them laugh, they're all like, "You're all right, Mark," pat you on the back. I remember once I was we were eating together breakfast, and there was 10 of us around the table, and someone said, "Hey, Mark, I see you get a lot of mail. You got anything from your girlfriend?" Because they all knew, they'd all decided that I wasn't gay, even though I got a lot of mail. And I said, "Oh no, she's the type who can lick everything but a stamp." And I don't know. It was like a gift from God that came, but everyone laughed. And after that, I was not only popular, but a few guys asked if I could write letters home to them, to their girlfriend, because they didn't know what to write. And
Cyrano de Bergerac, the game.
I was
right?
Bergerac. And so, and that was like, I got some coffees I badly needed, and some soups and stuff like that. And I got a big kick out of the fact that he started selling that same letter around to others. And when I found out, I was like, "Come on, man, a little respect." He says, "I'm sorry, man. It was really good." And I wrote another letter back to his girlfriend. But so that's what I mean. Creativity is a survival tool.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really vivid illustration on the micro level, right, of how it operates. I've always said, you look at somebody that's firing on all cylinders, like Michelangelo or Da Vinci, and it could be said there are more nerve. I don't know if you've heard this, but the corpus callosum is larger in gay men. I don't know about lesbians, but in gay men. And so I just think, there's more messaging between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, and sometimes that accounts for this genius creativity. But I also see I guess again in your story, how it happens on the micro level too. I got my brother an interview, not the job, he got it himself. But once I was at Disney, a lot of my colleagues left and founded DreamWorks. So I got my brother an interview, and he's gotten a whole career out of it. The first couple of you, like growing up in Burbank, he didn't have any contact with the gay community, or actually, there's a trans individual that showed up at a board meeting and said, "All right, now you're going to call me Kim or whatever," and brought a handbag. But like my brother had never seen any of that. So he'd bounce it off of me, and sometimes he'd say, "Oh, I don't know why they need to rub it in your face," that whole rhetoric. And I had to gently say, and it is a form of creativity. But I said, how can you judge somebody if they don't want to be the butt of the joke? They lead with it. They lead with their eccentricity, right? And their humor, as you're saying. It is absolutely a survival mechanism.
And how much, Virginia, how much do you, is this jibe with your own experience of how you've observed gay and straight people, or does part of you bristle and say, no, we're just as creative as you are?
No, I actually don't. And I was thinking about this as you guys were talking, and going to that whole thread. I think the reason why, and when I went to college in San Diego, so I had a lot of friends who were out of Hillcrest, so a lot of gay friends. Anyways, I always noticed that they always were more creative than my heterosexual friends that I was in college with. And I think a lot of it too is because they were more curious about the world, because they weren't confined to the social norms that the rest of us were trying to live up to. And because of that, it allowed more freedom of expression.
It's almost like a muscle, right? The minute you're written out of the narrative or silent. Oh my God, my mouth. Silenced and erased, right? That whole, the world is your oyster in terms of creating new paradigms.
Well, you know what? It's easier to think outside of the box when you live outside of the box.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Because you're not trying to conform to this set of rules, and like, and this is the first time I've ever really talked about it, so Nick's gonna be like, wow. But so I grew up in a very Christian household as well, because I know Dominic and I have mentioned a little bit of our background of family. But when I got into college, I'm actually bisexual. I am married to a man, but I am bisexual. And so I actually had quite a few girlfriends in college, and not because I was experimenting. I tend to, which I guess would probably nowadays be more non-binary, is how they'd probably, or I can't remember whatever term it is. Cause I'm not, there's so many different things on the gender spectrum. I can't even think of them all anymore, but
gender bifluid.
Yeah, maybe it's the fluid one. Maybe it's the fluid one. But anyways, where I tend to fall for the person based off who they are. It's not really the gender in front of me, is really what it is. But back then it was considered bisexuality because, it was male, female, is how everybody looked at gender then. And so I actually had quite a few girlfriends. It was because I was trying to explore anything. It was just because we connected, and we connected both on a physical and intellectual level. And when I started to realize that about myself in college, that's really, like you guys said, the world became my oyster. I started to get more curious about things, and that's when I started looking at my spirituality more, and a lot of other things, going, wait, I don't have to stay within this family belief system that I grew up in, and value system, or the social norms that I have been part of my cultural identity of growing up in. I can break out of that. And it was really, really freeing for me, which has been great because as a mother, my oldest is transgender. My middle child technically will tell you she's ace, even though she does have a partner now, but it's not a physical type thing for her at all. My youngest is still figuring herself out. Probably is going to be cisgender just based off comments she says. But yeah, it's allowed my kids that freedom because I've never put those constraints on them.
They already they grew up sort of boxless.
Yeah.
Neither inside or outside. But I've seen so many people who raised in the Bible Belt or fundamentalist Christian, and when they first fall in love, in particular, they're saying, if this is wrong, then can't be wrong.
Mhm.
This is fully positive. Two consenting adults, and what happened between us is beautiful. So
Right.
if then the religion that condemns it has to be wrong. So
Right.
I'm freeing myself from the shackles of that,
Mhm.
and I feel so sorry for, and sometimes it ends up freeing their parents and their family members from the shackles of that too.
Yeah.
Um, uh, or they go back and they're part of the pressure that changes a lot of a lot of these churches that, were, you're going to hell, are now more like love the sinner, not crazy about the sin. And then, or the parents change. There's, even within the Christian right, it's amazing how they're carving out sort of ways to
Reframing their
accept
stories.
gay people as long as they don't act on it,
Mm.
whatever. Um,
I don't think many of us like to hear "love the sinner, hate the sin."
no,
Right? My
no,
brother-in-law is a minister, and he did a whole talk about how nobody wants to hear that that every day that they're a sinner,
Right.
or that our sex is better than your sex. I think we're all over the place here, so I'm going to
Yeah.
steer it back by
uh-huh.
asking. It's sounding like, because we're spending so much time talking about pretty universal things in the gay experience, actually, not to minimize them, but pretty, universal things we've all gone through, like trying to navigating all of that, the judgment, the Christian aspect. I think we all relate to a degree to all of it, and the marginalization and what character might be built from that marginalization versus when does it tax a person and create the self-destructive behavior. So I'm asking you straight out because I want to get back to a couple questions before we wrap this up. So my question, Mark, is, are we spending so much time talking about the gay experience here and the challenges it presents because that contributed to, I keep calling it self-destruction. You may not identify that way, but I think I've heard and read enough to know that you wouldn't have gone that route, right? Had you made different choices. Did all of this weigh into how you ended up in prison?
Well, listen, there's one thing I'm very clear of. If there'd never been a world without AIDS, if there'd never been
Mm.
AIDS,
Hmm.
none of this would have possibly happened.
Yep.
It distorted the fear was in itself extremely distorting, and the grief on top of the fear, just,
Mm-hmm.
so. And I thought, interestingly enough, I kind of thought when COVID happened, and my story had been optioned and was shopping around, Warner Brothers was shopping it around. I was like, oh, this theme of the fear of death and how it's, now everyone will understand, not just like someone who confronted cancer or something like that. But in fact, it didn't. It was the opposite. People were like, no, I don't want this. I don't want to see this on screen. They wanted to escape from it. So, uh, and plus, really, uh, us the brunt of COVID was borne by a minority of the population,
Mm-hmm.
including older minorities, etc. A lot of us, I didn't know anybody who died of COVID, but um, that by far, because I had plenty of gay friends um, who didn't go off the deep end. Plenty of HIV didn't
Mm-hmm.
go up to the deep end
Mm-hmm.
at all. But I did know there was a propensity within the circle of crystal meth. They were overwhelmingly HIV, and everyone had lost somebody, and some of them died. And that you just. But if there hadn't been AIDS, no, I would. I don't think I might have gone off into a sort of addiction. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely liked drugs and alcohol, and and that's not really so different from straight people. But going to prison or the self destructiveness, um, it was a weird perfect storm of circumstances. Uh, but when I started looking back at how the molestation affected me, I realized that
Mm.
it was had much greater impact on my life than I
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah.
There's a cascading thing. There's the feeling that I wasn't protected, that
Hmm.
that lying made me more powerful than telling the truth, but also uh,
It's
uh,
like the perfect storm.
a trauma, and here is it was I was it was my first orgasm, and I was very attracted to this man in a way that it was just prepubescent. I couldn't realize
Mm.
it. I
Mhm.
liked the hair on his shoulder.
Right.
I liked the way he
Right.
threw me up in the air, and I liked
Right.
his deep voice. But when he, you know, put his arms around me and in my sleeping bag in this bit teepee in the middle of the night and jerked me off, um, it was still a non-consensual thing that
Of
scared the
course.
Yeah.
fuck
Right.
out of me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Yeah, it's a very formative time, and our wiring, right? We're still very malleable. We've got a lot of vulnerable neural circuits. So I would
But I
say,
was such, so it was very confusing because I knew this was wrong, and I felt like I'd done something very shameful. And at the same time, a part of me was very erotic.
yep.
Um,
Well, that is, again, I'm not minimizing anything, but everyone will say that. That's the confusion. When you blame yourself or asked if you somehow played a part in it or invited it, straight, gay, doesn't matter, molested by a woman, molested by a man, that is part of the mind fuck. So we are a little short on time, but I
okay.
just want to say, I mean, since we're down this rabbit hole,
Mhm.
I was molested by a female. And I often didn't want to tell that story for one reason. I think it was a long arc for society to understand that there's a genetic component wherever you land on nature versus nurture, that it is certainly not a choice to be gay. We just weren't there yet. It was very important for me that people understood this is not a lifestyle, this is not a choice. So for most of my adult life, I wasn't going to give anybody the satisfaction of saying, well, of course you have an aversion to women because you were molested by one. Nope, doesn't work that way. I had been with men before. I was 15 and a half when we smoked hash, and I willingly, again, later you go, she's fucked up. She has issues of authority and power, and it definitely wasn't right. But I was a willing participant. It was, Mrs. Robinson, and we were smoking hash. I thought I was a willing participant. So my point is, I kind of didn't talk about that a lot because it was important to me. People understood it wasn't a disease on my part. I am gay and I was molested by a woman. Do you know what I mean? Both can exist.
Mhm.
So I just find, I did have somebody at my 10-year high school reunion say, I mentioned, yeah, my dad was an alcoholic. And she goes, there you go. Every gay person I know comes from dysfunction. And I said, you show me the Cleaver family. You show me the Brady Bunch. Right? Every family has
Yeah,
some level of dysfunction.
my older brother, I had a second brother who committed suicide, unfortunately, in 2009. But he would say, um, when you look up dysfunctional in the dictionary, and there's our
Right.
family, and I was like, you don't have many friends that you talk to, do you? Because that is family
Everybody has,
unit.
right,
Good
right.
luck,
It's called life at some
it's
point.
called life, right? Exactly. And so, but I had always thought that when I got high or drunk, it was I was a pure uh, addict in the sense of I did it for the pleasure of the high, right? And that and only looking back with a lot of self study and do I realize that nah, you were suppressing some pain too.
Yeah.
You didn't want to feel some stuff, and that is very clear. Is that when my brother died, and a lot of
Right.
friends that I didn't
Well,
want to feel
if you don't mind, I will jump in here because again, I've had a kind of a front row seat to addiction, and even got involved with somebody that was in recovery, and being in the gay community, it's been pretty hard to avoid witnessing, different relationships with addiction. So, I guess I would just say I did connect those dots. That you have a brother that died of suicide, one that died of AIDS, and I actually see you as a cycle breaker because you've now created this next chapter, right? You didn't think you were going to survive, then you had to create new rules in order to move on. So you seem like a cycle breaker. But in it, I still was like there's no way his home life was more traumatic than mine. There's no way there was more dysfunction. What is the difference here? If that makes sense. So
No,
then
listen,
that's why
yeah.
I mentioned the trauma from World War II. Why did you choose to, in the very, I think, the afterword is when you told those stories of trauma? Does that make sense? Why did you include your mother's trauma? I'm sorry if I'm confusing your aunt and your mother.
No, I was very close to both of them, and but for me, if we get back to story, it was like I
Mm-hmm.
grew up. My first short story was called "The Black Framed Letter," and it was about me, the 10-year-old hero, getting a letter to his father in the underground. It wasn't traumatic to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
What I did inherit is the sort of my the sense my mother would always, even the streets of New York, my mother was a fast walker, you know? so, so that's amazing. And I would finally go, Mom, why are we going, why are we trying to pass people? People were walking not slowly, they weren't.
She's trying to
And
outrun her demons. Is that it?
no, it was because at a, you know, in France, you had to get home before the curfew. Uh, uh,
Oh,
you never knew if there was going to be a rafle, which was a roundup, because they would round up people
wow,
in a
wow.
street, and they would start shooting them out of revenge for the killing of a German officer, and so um, uh, and that she managed to pass along to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of my friends have always said, Mark, will you just chill? You're so hyper, which I probably would have been, but like my mom, that's the way I am. But this feeling that you could be a refugee
Yep.
at any moment, and um, uh, I, part of me was like, I was ready to go to prison, even years
Wow.
before I had any reason.
Wow.
This feeling that I was going to end up there,
Mm-hmm.
and I would go, no, you're not. Da, 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 da. But uh, so it's not unrelated, but I've known too many people who grew up in really dysfunctional, abusive
Mm-hmm.
families, and or who had parents who were Holocaust survivors and
Mm-hmm.
who really passed on a trauma. My mother says, I was very young, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought that would live forever. And she doesn't remember the war as being uh, that traumatizing. It was after the war, when she
Yeah,
had
but
a
it's
child out of wedlock,
sometimes
that all of her trauma happened, and so
actually.
she may have passed that trauma on to me. You know.
Yep. I think we have, I mean, Eckhart Tolle would call it the pain body, right? And so
Mhm.
we have experiences that are in our cellular memory for sure. Virginia, does that, the way he put that, it reminded me a little, like I always mention Anya Achtenberg. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But when you said, maybe you inherited the fast walking from your mom for very good reason, it reminded me of Anya. To tie it back to story a little bit. She coaches writers, and she kind of basically said when you are displaced, not marginalized per se, but when, let's say, your home country has been colonized and you've lost your culture and your identity, you feel displaced. So, do you remember this? She said, like, when
Mhm.
you are coached, because most people say, oh, a sense of place is so important in your writing, and being linear and immediate instead of disjointed and telescoping back and flashing
Mhm.
forward. She said, actually, the voice is more authentic for somebody who doesn't have a home, who feels displaced. It's fascinating to me. And so I kind of heard that a little bit in the idea that you got to get home before sundown because bad things will happen. It's
Well,
so in your
more
cellular memory.
specifically, there was this afternoon we were all under the gazebo at my parents' country home. This was in the Berkshires in the '80s, and all of us kids were joking around and laughing, but we spoke in rapid fire uh, English, and even though my mother's English was better than my father's, she still couldn't follow our humor and what was making us laugh, and she burst into tears because she'd just come back from
Mm-hmm.
France, where she had no trouble following her nieces and nephews and making jokes along with them.
Mhm.
Right.
And she
Right.
says, "You have no idea." We were very concerned what it's like to be déraciné, which is
Mm.
uprooted
hmm
or displaced.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly and since I was the one who was sent to France and learned French the best. I was this sort of link in the
Mm-hmm.
family between my mother and understanding how French people thought, made jokes, and could communicate in the family. And I think maybe that's why I waited till she died to read the book, because we had a relationship that was
Mm-hmm.
incredibly keyed into each other. And like you, who didn't ever want anybody to say, I couldn't stand this idea of like, are you gay because, yeah, because you were so close to your mother,
Right.
you know,
Well, I think it is universal. Men want to rescue their mom, straight or gay. It's not an Oedipus thing, but we
yeah,
want to rescue her. Is that fair to say?
or protect her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she also, she loved all her children equally, but she liked me a little bit more.
Overbearing mother, distant father.
But we were friends.
Right.
If we'd met somewhere else, like she was the mother of a friend of mine, we would become friends. Whereas,
Virginia, you've said that about your mom, right? You'd be
Mhm.
best friends regardless.
Mhm.
yeah, and I don't know if you have that. Either of your siblings feel that way with your mom, Virginia.
Well, I'm my mom's only.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, so I can't say that, but I can say with my kids, because my oldest is the half to my two others, but they all have me as their mom, as their main mom, and my two younger ones will tell you that my oldest is my favorite, and that's because we have a very special bond, because of what we have been through together. And then also when she came out, saying, "Hey, mom, I know I'm your son, but now I'm going to be your daughter." It took the rest of the family longer to come along in that process. Where for me, it was, it's even though it was a loss to not have a son anymore, I didn't see it as a total loss because I gained something deeper with my older kid in a whole new way. So I think that's why my other ones feel that way. So I think, I think it depends on the relationship with your kids. But I mean, my other two, no, I love them just as much because my youngest one's my travel buddy. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a family of six, and my mom was very judicious. She was very smart, and never playing favorites. And I think all mothers try to do that, right? But
Mhm,
I think it's fine to say our relationship is different. I mean,
mhm.
my mom and I talk about art till the cows come home. Really, nobody else in the family would give a shit about Jansen's art history books, and so that's our bond. But anyway, I would hope you have a different relationship with each of your
Yeah,
children.
I
Yeah.
think gay men tend to be have a more closer sense of humor
Yep.
than their
Mhm.
siblings with their mothers. It's not always, but it is very common. And I don't know if there's a genetic component, and maybe homosexuality is passed to the male through the female, which
Hmm.
I always thought it was maybe
Well,
like
here's
homophilia. That
we're
seems
we're we're
totally
pretty
logical.
so sorry. We're really down a rabbit hole, but since you brought it, the whole interview is like, since you brought it up, I have something to say on that. Have you heard this one, Mark? Again, my mom was as good as it gets, but it was a learning curve for her after I came out. But then blissfully, she would say, I heard on Oprah, or if you heard about a study, I heard the index finger is longer in both lesbians and, or the corpus callosum idea. And so she retroactively did her homework and let me know she was paying attention. She didn't join GLAD or anything, but she let me know she was paying attention. Anyway, as far as it being passed from the mother, have you guys heard this one? That higher testosterone levels in the prenatal environment create both gay men and lesbians. Or there's a correlation, put it that way. Causality, we have yet to see. But there's a correlation between higher testosterone in the prenatal environment and children that are lesbian or gay. And so to me, like, again, I got to create a theory out of everything. I think time will tell. But to me, I feel like, okay, if we have limited resources and we just instinctively don't want to overpopulate the planet, it makes sense that actually the latter born children are the gay ones. There's a correlation there too. So it's almost like nature is saying, all right, we're going to cut you off. You've had 3 kids. I'm going to make the next one gay. So there's no chance they'll procreate. Because both are true. The gay kid happens to be the latter born kid, and there's a higher
What
testosterone
number are
level.
you?
I'm the last. I'm the youngest.
Okay, and I'm the fourth of five.
Right, right. So
Um,
something's going on there, and we'll learn more and more. But we are way over time. I don't know if you guys are paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
well, I'm
Mark,
starting to realize that instead of a late lunch, I might have an early dinner.
so sorry. Well,
Yeah.
look, I've said this many times, but I've never meant it more. I think there's a part two. I would love, really, because I honestly, I haven't gotten to a single question that I've written down. Not one. So I took the time to write them and I like them. So I'd like to do part two. But
Okay.
maybe just so I feel like we at least end. I mean, it's all good. We love our tangents, right, Virginia? We love our rabbit holes. And
Yes.
Mark, I always hope you feel we talked about some things that are of value to you. I'll give you a chance at the very end to impart anything that you really want to impart to listeners. But I guess, I don't know, for my own satisfaction, I'm going to read one of my prepared questions. We kind of hinted at this earlier. I found all your characters very redeeming, very redeemable. And then I noticed I keep calling it the afterword, but it might have been just one of the later chapters. You did give us here's what became of ... And some seemed like, they found redemption and were on the straight and narrow, and some not so much. So I guess, again, I really want to read it, but I don't want to take your time flipping through here. Okay, here we go. So what I wrote is on art therapy, in the spirit of Language of the Soul and that documentary I mentioned, which is Shakespeare in Prison. I want to ask about the role of self-expression and creativity in general, especially in rehabilitation. But I also want to ask about redemption in general. It became a theme for me in reading your book. Do you have anything to say about the mechanics of redemption? And you could fill in that word, right? With transformation, rehabilitation. Do you have anything to say about redemption and the mechanics of it?
Well, there was very little uh, valuable teaching uh, in prison. You had to take this course that was just abysmally taught about life skills. That was with multiple choice. I mean, you learn more from a good episode of Oprah. Um, but if that time had been spent on art classes and theater
Exactly.
classes, the bang from the buck would have been extraordinary, as they have
Mhm.
shown for the Shakespeare program. But also
Mhm.
with art, I mean, that day that I got all those letters, thank God, because there was literally hostility toward me in the room because I had so many letters. My sister sent an envelope full of colored pencils,
Mhm.
and I distributed them quite grandly, and fabulous paper, because she's my muse. If we were ever that would be great part of part two, and I was able to distribute them to the guys. Some of them who uh, were earning soup money
Mm.
by drawing Disney characters for um, for other prisoners to send back to their little daughters or their
Mm.
sons, and they were so grateful. And but I had a few conversations with. I remember seeing some one time, just seeing something weirdly accidentally beautiful within the room because the light was coming through, and this guy was
Accidental beauty. That should be your
right.
next
And I
memoir. I
tried to
love that.
describe that to
Accidentally
somebody,
beautiful.
and he was like, "No." Yeah, he's like, "I just do portraits. What are you talking about?" And I realized that these guys were very literal, and that's the sort of rejiggering that was so needed, and that you do a theater with a good art teacher.
Mhm.
Stop thinking that you have to draw something exactly as it was, because they get locked within. We were talking about heteronormative thinking, but the rules of impoverished backgrounds and what men are allowed
Mhm.
to do and what women are supposed to do
Mhm.
are just as stratifying,
Yeah.
and very damaging. And they don't get freed up by school,
Mhm.
uh, because they get, the guys get into discipline problems early on, and the class are overcrowded, and some make it out, and a lot of it is from music. I mean, the
Mhm.
the rap rap was really important to some of these guys, and it was because they found creativity in it.
Mhm. Well,
Uh,
I think it's easy to say. I mean, here's what I hear in there.
mhm,
Like, I think we all know art therapy programs exist for a reason. And what I've landed on is that if you aren't creating, you're probably destroying. And that can be
mhm.
turned inward as self-destruction, or it can be turned outward as aggression. But I've found that to be true. If you don't have a creative outlet, you tend to be destructive, whether it's inward or outward. But just now, you kind of made me think about it a little bit differently. These rigid, whether it's gender norms or relationship models or any other institution that's a product of socialization, if you're bound by those, how could you possibly self create? Right? We need to self create as a form of our evolution. If you don't adapt, you die. So that's what I'm hearing. And it was in your book. I found them very locked into these rigid ideas, right? That kept them from self-expression. And I'm just extending it to say our life is a creation. It's the creative process in action. So if you're bound by, right, all these rules, I mean, in art, my mom would say, why would you care? The sky doesn't have to be blue. I had a
It's,
I had a grandmother that would all she cared about was that little Joey, she had spent money on the paintbrushes, so make sure you shake them out and you make the perfect tip before you put it back in that cup. And my mom was like, "What the fuck?" Because
yeah.
she was all about self-expression. Anyway, I just think that was really beautiful what you just said that, or I think you hinted at this idea that the rigidity of all of that actually, and what I heard was keeps people from creating their own
And of
reality and
course, you're in prison,
manifesting their highest potential and capacity.
so everything is so rigid in prison. Talk about reinforcing it.
Hmm.
But a lot of these guys, you'd be surprised at how voracious readers they were,
Well,
because that's how they could escape. You
yep.
know,
Well, you mentioned the racial thing earlier, and I meant to ask, or I wanted to ask at that point, like, how ironic is it that yes, you're strange bedfellows because of the marginalization, but yet prison culture doesn't allow for it. You very much portrayed it as racism in action in terms of the segregation. So yes, I guess the question that I did write down, I'll slip one more of them in, is yeah, we all carry around tropes about prison culture. Whether it's Orange is the New Black or Oz, or again, happen to have seen Shakespeare in prison, but who knows? And I did spend my one night in prison, but it was just one night. It was county. I got an eyeful, trust me.
mhm.
But it's very rudimentary, right? My understanding of that. What was your biggest surprise in terms of, I'm calling it prison culture and the politics therein?
Well, I actually, one of my chapters is called Office Politics
Mm,
because, um, and that word is actually referred to when they talk about which prisons they're going to go to.
hmm.
Um, you know, because everyone starts at these clearinghouse prisons before they're assigned where they're going to do down the main line, and they would say, "Oh God, the politics are so bad there," or the gang banging, and that um, what surprised me that there was less violence than I thought there would be,
Mm-hmm.
and
I'll
there
be
was
honest, that was my takeaway. I have seen again the Shakespeare in prison one. I found it very redeeming that they could cooperate, and you mentioned some early on cooperation
and
too in terms of
much less sex. I never
right.
saw.
That's what I was going to say. Like you talked about the television, how magically that was the easiest thing to negotiate was what channel the television was on. But anyway, I was a little disappointed. Like, where's the prison sex? Come on,
Yeah,
Mark.
I was almost disappointed, except after I had more sex. I had the Olympics of sex when I was, on crystal meth. You know,
Oh, right, right.
I mean, I
Everything
had
else
more
was
than a lifetime, and my testosterone went down to zilch because that's what HIV does
right. Of course. Yeah.
over time, and so I had no interest. I noticed there was, some guys with hot bodies. I did notice it, but you made sure your eyes stayed front.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
don't want to make light of it. I'm being facetious. I seriously,
no, but that's
there's a rape culture too. I mean, statistically, I'm sure you've heard this, Mark. Men get raped more frequently than women if you factor in the prison systems.
well, I
So,
didn't see that. I think it gets over, but within maximum security. But if
mhm.
you're in minimum, which I was, where you're all dorms, then no. I mean, I didn't see it, and it wasn't very often. But the threat
Seems
about
really hard. It seems like it would be so hard to pull off. I mean, I remember you
there was no
mentioned,
privacy, and who wants to do
yeah.
it in a porta potty?
Right.
Um,
Right. But
you
no,
know,
I'm talking the prison rape. I mean, you've heard, and you mentioned Lynn too. Remember Lynn?
yeah, yeah.
Like that is tricky. She's very vulnerable, and she wanted to shower alone when she could, right? So
Yeah,
I
but
don't
it's
know.
more. It's more. No one was attracted to Lynn in any way, shape, or form. But you asked what sort of surprised me, and
Mhm.
that was one thing that surprised me. I didn't see anything resembling rape or threatening of it. The homophobia seemed complete across the board, and no one wanted to be uh, tarred with that feather. And
Interesting.
what I found is that but they all respected honesty. And
Mm,
when I raised my hand when we had a meeting, and it's like, are there any homos or bisexual or gay people in here? Because they were so preoccupied with making sure we didn't smoke after anybody. Like,
right. I remember. I read your book, man. That's
right.
Tell us about that a little bit. That's
That
pretty alarming.
when I raised my hand, and I thought, oh God, you're in for it now. But I got a level of respect because, well, at
Mm,
least he was honest about it.
yep.
And that kind of surprised me.
I identify actually as a short kid with freckles and a space in his teeth, and I could have been bullied growing up, but people respected me. They liked, oh, he can draw elephants, right? Remember Virginia? He can draw
Mhm.
unicorns, he can draw elephants. So I actually felt like I protected myself through garnering respect. Does that sound a little bit like they
Well,
respected you?
listen, I think you were also probably very funny and just likable.
Mm,
And also, it helps when you have a posse of your family.
mm,
Because with me, I could have been bullied, but I had my older brother, I had a sister everyone wanted to date. My mother was a teacher there, and so I got very lucky, and I was never bullied. But they were, and I suspect that that your older brothers not being that
oh no,
much
they were the worst. They were they picked on me the most. So
on you. That's
yeah,
right.
of
But if
course.
anyone else picked on you,
Who knows?
I don't know. So,
But but it
no,
does
I
lead
mean,
me. Do you feel like those same attributes that saved you from bullying, those were the ones that were assets in prison as well?
well, that's the likability,
Right,
and
right.
for me, the quickest route to likability is sense of humor.
Humor. Yep.
Yeah, and that I know you've always had. I'm just sure of it.
Actually, it's funny you would say that. I do remember my sixth grade report card, and I was just on the verge of puberty, so I was probably starting to act out more than ever. The alcoholism in my household, I was feeling it, and impending puberty and the sense that you might be different or gay. There was a lot going on in sixth grade, but I remember I was a very good boy, even with the dysfunction. I was such a good boy until sixth grade. And I think it's just puberty. But I remember getting in trouble for the first time in sixth grade. But she also wrote, Nikki is developing a nice sense of humor.
There we go.
But back then they used humor to mean mood, you know? It
uh,
really meant a sense of humor. Like I can read facial cues. I think that's what she meant. Anyway.
yeah.
All
Um,
right,
all right.
Mark. I swear to God, we need to do a part two, but I will end by saying, sorry to keep interjecting, but I feel like there is something you would love to impart to our listeners. Am I wrong? Is there anything we didn't hit on that you would like to? We are going to put the links, by the way, to your book in the episode description. I would love to do a part two. But in terms of wrapping this up here, what words of wisdom do you have for our listeners? No pressure.
Well, just I should have had something ready. Um,
Read
the
the
other
nearest.
podcast was called "The Disorientation and Survival," and it's just like um, what to understand the second part of my story, and we'll talk about it, is like that it was very it was it was quite something to realize that I had to put the future, a concept of the future, back in my brain.
Mhm.
And I think for people who survived HIV who didn't expect to, that yeah, you're very happy about it, but you're also incredibly disoriented,
Wow.
and it takes a while to get that back. And I'm saying that sort of as a service for sort of understanding the HIV positive HIV survivors in your life,
Mhm.
and also cancer survivors, etc. My story is about time
Mhm.
in many ways. Um,
Is there, I mean, of course I relate a little bit, um, but I feel like for me, it's a matter of regaining my agency and reclaiming certain qualities. Because, anyway, I don't want to make it about me,
yeah,
but
well, getting my future back was reclaiming my agency, but that's a
Mhm.
process.
Yep.
Yeah, and I feel very much full of agency now. I'm just full of resentment that I have to go through this thing of getting sick and dying that I'm a privilege to at 66. That I'm like, God damn it, I lived my quota.
do you
I
do you
did
happen
my.
to listen to Jane Fonda much? I have her autobiography on my table here. But are you a fan of Jane Fonda at
Yeah,
all?
I do like her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just think she's amazing in terms of fighting ageism with every breath and remaining relevant and intellectually curious. But more than that, she said many times, I never imagined that I'd live this long, let alone be working. And anyway, she gets me up every morning just because she still gives a shit. She's politically active and she hasn't thrown in the towel on humanity or the planet. That's a
and
feat, man.
I can't believe my life would be perfect professionally if I was 28, because that's exactly where I should
Right,
be. Yeah,
right,
I'd be right
right,
where I should be. But
right.
this feeling of very much that I'm in my prime and moving forward and have all these things I'm going to get done. And the idea of turning 80. I was like, well, I'll go into that death chamber that you saw in a Star Trek, and it's like, no,
Do
no, I'm ready to live to 90.
you remember Logan's Run?
Is that what the plot is, that you're all gonna die at a certain age?
Yeah, it's like putting you out to pasture, but they had a really haunting image of, yeah, there were these discs, right? And you just went
Well, I,
off.
I got it. There's an episode with Donald Ogden Steers where he's gonna. Their society means that at 60 you go into a chamber. And that's it.
Yeah.
Um, but he's discovering a cure. Anyway, um, uh, it was very food for thought, as all the later Star Treks in particular were. Um, okay, yeah, but otherwise we're going to go on another tangent.
Well, no, I think that's a good note to end on though, because
Mm,
we're all works in progress, right? And I know
mhm.
that I'm somewhere on that arc of reclaiming my agency in the world, but I relate to what you just said. It's like, if only I was 28. Because I'm good, but you know what? The world's not throwing me any opportunities at my age.
Right,
Right?
there's a lot of ageism going on, but a lot of
Absolutely.
people are going through the same thing uh,
Yep.
at the same time. But basically, creativity, it's almost very little is not improved by the application of more creativity. That's what I would say, that is also in line with the podcast.
Beautiful.
And
Yep.
I just encourage everyone to uh, uh, we didn't even get into Viktor Frankl and
Mm.
reframing, uh,
Do
which
you want to share a quote from him or
no,
save that for next time?
it's the story. It's the story of that he starts his book out with. The survivor comes into his office and he said, he's just lost his wife and she was everything to him, and he doesn't know if he can go on, and he wants to, uh, thinking of killing himself, and Viktor Frankl says, "And your wife, did she love you just as much?" "Oh yes, very much. She was very devoted to me." "And how would she have felt if you died first?" "She would have been devastated." And so Viktor Frankl says, "Well, uh, then think of your grief as the gift you're giving her, because you have saved her from the grief she would from feeling what you would be feeling now." And
Beautiful.
he left the office, and he could move forward and
Hmm.
see his grief as this sort of weird gift. And for me, that story has stayed with me, and it's taught me you can always reframe
Hmm.
almost everything by telling yourself a different story.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Okay, no, that is in the spirit of our podcast.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
Okay. That's when I rehearsed in my head in the shower.
Well, no, I think we should just end on that note because it was beautiful.
Yes.
But I will say, like, we sometimes don't recognize our legacy. We think our legacy is meant to be one thing, but it takes others to tell you your gifts sometimes. We don't see our own gifts, or, one thing we might have done or said that did make a difference that it's not even on our radar. Like, my family are just so generous. My parents would give you the shirts off their back, and they do, to a fault, where, money is not a priority. They're just so fucking generous. But I did a little experiment one year, and I said, hey, everybody, to my family of 6, I think I assigned them a sibling. Say what you like about this sibling. And my parents were just so judicious, right? They had to say the right things, not play favorites, but they said things that they identified with and prided themselves on, like generosity. And I thought, I guess I am. Because you don't recognize it in yourself. It's such a normal thing to do. Does that make sense?
Oh, I recognize it myself. My bank account tells me exactly how generous I am.
But it's their
values. I don't even want to go into how much money I've spent on a family in Gaza. Right. But that's.
You know what I'm saying, though. Like, you'd actually, because they are your values and they constitute your worldview, you don't see them as gifts. And sometimes it takes another person's pair of eyeballs to remind you of your gifts. So,
well, the thing is, I tend to be the person reminding, for example, my sisters and others of my husband of the gifts. And not to sound egotistical, but I've grown into myself in a way that I never thought I would. I'm much, I always wanted to live in the present. I live in the present. I always wanted to work in languages. I subtitle for a living. I can't believe how, I wanted to write at least one good book. I wrote one good book. So I'm not resting on my quote laurels, but I was like, every day I'm in that day and I'm doing exactly what I'm doing. And I used to live so much 10 minutes in the future, or what I should have done that, and regretting the past. And so, now is the best address.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that meth kind of forces you into the moment. You're thinking about the next minute and the minute after that, not next week or next year. But it sounds like you've really learned to be in the moment without the vice. And I hear gratitude in that too. Not everybody can say, right, that I've accomplished my bucket list, or, pick the goal. Like you said, being in the moment. I think it's a beautiful gift to be able to do that. But I think all it takes is shifting one's perspective to that of gratitude.
And that's why I take my hands off I'm thinking of all the wise things I can say, but I took my hands off the rearview mirror. I keep on the steering wheel. And that's my advice to everybody.
Beautiful. Did either of you see Poor Things?
No, I haven't.
I haven't seen that yet. It looks to me like I won't like it, but
yeah, well, it's pretty stylistic. Of course, you have to I can't say his name properly, but the director, he's an acquired taste, but really lush production design, really beautiful to look at, and a really simple parable, almost insultingly simple, right? The archetype of the basically Daedalus, or the inventor archetype, the mad scientist, they call him God. So it's like, how much more can you beat us over the head with this metaphor? But it's not trying to be clever. But anyway, the point is, I noticed in that, I had never thought of it this way, but I think there's a lot of disillusionment themes of when you finally get in the room with God, is he selfish or not? I've seen that a million times. But this one was like, once God literally died, she came into her own and her authentic self. So it's almost what you hinted at, which is throwing your hands in the air in surrender and saying, let me serve. I think that is a milestone. But yeah, you got to go through those valleys to get there.
Waking up in the morning, it's a great first question is to say every day, how can I be of service?
Beautiful.
To the
you
world,
can pick trash.
to the universe in general.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, those are words to end on right there.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you so much, Dominic, and thank you so much, Virginia.
You're
I'm sorry that
welcome.
we're so bossy. Especially Dominic.
Yeah, well, I've been called worse. I'm the host. I'm supposed to direct.
That's right. It's okay.
Yes.
Yeah. This is your show. Okay. Goodbye. Thanks so much.
All right.
Great having you.
Okay.
And to our listeners, remember, life is story, and we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can tell a new story. See you next time.
We want to take a moment to thank our wonderful listeners and supporters. Your continued support and sharing of our podcast helps us spread the transformative power of storytelling. If you enjoy our episodes, please rate and review us on your favorite platform and share the podcast with friends and family. For more enriching conversations and insights, subscribe to Language of the Soul podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media and visit our Patreon website for the latest updates and exclusive content. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to life. If you'd like to support us further, consider joining our Patreon community for exclusive content and donation options. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds.